My name is Michael Thompson, and I never thought I'd be writing these words from a shelter in downtown Detroit. 6 months ago, I was wearing three-piece suits and making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. Now I'm wearing the same clothes I've had on for 3 days, and the only decision I make is which park bench might be safest to sleep on tonight. The irony isn't lost on me. I used to drive past homeless people in my BMW, sometimes dropping $1 into their cup while feeling generous, never imagining that life could strip away everything so completely, so ruthlessly. The fall from corner office to street corner happened faster than I ever thought possible. If you believe that miracles still happen, or if you've ever experienced something that deeply touched your faith, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so we can continue walking this journey of faith together. It started with what my attorney called a perfect storm of circumstances. The company I'd built from nothing, Thompson Digital Solutions, became the target of a federal investigation. Not because I'd done anything illegal, but because my business partner, David Morrison, had been embezzling funds and cooking the books for years. When the FBI raided our offices on that cold February morning, they froze everything. Bank accounts, assets, even my personal savings that I'd foolishly intertwined with the business. The media painted me as the mastermind, despite having no evidence. Tech CEO under investigation for fraud screamed the headlines. It didn't matter that I was as shocked as anyone when they uncovered David's scheme. In the court of public opinion, I was guilty by association. Clients pulled their contracts. Vendors demanded immediate payment. My own employees looked at me like I was a stranger. Sarah, my wife of 15 years, tried to stand by me at first. "We'll get through this, Mike," she'd whisper while holding me as I stared at the ceiling at night, my mind racing with legal strategies and financial calculations. But as the weeks turned into months, as our savings disappeared into legal fees, as reporters camped outside our house in Bloomfield Hills, something in her eyes changed. The night she asked for a divorce, we were sitting in our kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd planned our future, where she told me she was pregnant with Emma, where we'd celebrated every promotion and milestone. The marble countertops that had once symbolized our success now felt cold and mocking. "I can't do this anymore, Michael," she said, her voice steady but distant. "Emma needs stability. I need stability. This isn't the life I signed up for." I wanted to fight for us, to remind her of our vows, of the love we'd built over 15 years. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw fear. Not fear of poverty. Her family had money, but fear of being associated with me, with the scandal that had become my identity. The divorce was swift. She got the house, custody of Emma, and most of what little remained of our assets. I got a cardboard box with my personal belongings and an address for a budget motel on 8 Mile Road. The motel room smelled of cigarettes and industrial cleaner. The carpet was stained with mysteries I didn't want to contemplate, and the radiator clanged all night like a ghost in chains. I spent my days in the law library, researching my case, writing appeals, calling attorneys who stopped returning my calls as my bank account dwindled to nothing. When I couldn't afford the motel anymore, I moved into my old Honda Civic. I'd parked it behind a 24-hour diner, thinking I could stay invisible, maybe shower in their restroom, buy a cup of coffee to justify my presence. But the manager, a thin woman with suspicious eyes, caught on after 3 nights. "You can't sleep here," she said, tapping on my window with her keys. "This isn't a campground." "I'm not causing any trouble," I pleaded. "And I know what you're doing. Move along, or I'm calling the cops." That's how I ended up in Roosevelt Park, a small green space in downtown Detroit, surrounded by office buildings where people like the old me would hurry past without making eye contact with people like the new me. The first night on the bench, I told myself it was temporary, just until I could figure something out. just until the legal system recognized my innocence, just until my life made sense again. But justice moves slowly, and winter in Detroit moves fast. The Honda broke down after 2 weeks, leaving me with nothing but what I could carry in a torn duffel bag. My phone service got cut off. My gym membership, my last connection to showers and normalcy, expired. I applied for every job I could find, but a simple Google search of my name brought up articles about the investigation. No one wanted to hire Michael Thompson, the disgraced CEO. The city has systems for people like me, I discovered. Shelters that opened when the temperature dropped below freezing. Soup kitchens that served meals with a side of judgment. Welfare offices where overworked caseworkers treated you like a number in a system designed to process human misery. But during the day, when the shelters closed and the services shut down, the streets became home. Roosevelt Park became my world. The bench near the fountain became my address. The public restroom became my office. The nearby McDonald's, where I could nurse a $1 coffee for hours, became my sanctuary. I learned the rhythms of the homeless community, who could be trusted, who to avoid, where the police were most tolerant, where the church groups brought sandwiches on Sundays. I also learned about invisibility, how people who once shook my hand at business meetings now looked through me as if I were made of air. How a change of clothes, a few weeks without a shave, a certain slump to your shoulders could make you disappear from the social world you once inhabited. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold or even the fear. It was the voice in my head that whispered, louder each day, that maybe I deserved this. Maybe this was justice for all the homeless people I'd ignored. All the employees I'd laid off during tough quarters, all the times I'd chosen profit over people. Maybe Michael Thompson, the man, was finally paying for the sins of Michael Thompson, the businessman. Winter settled over Detroit like a heavy blanket, and I settled into a routine of survival. Wake up at dawn before the park police made their rounds. Find somewhere warm during the day. Return to the bench after dark. Repeat. The simplicity of it was almost meditative. If you could ignore the constant gnawing of hunger and the deeper gnawing of a life that had lost all meaning, I stopped counting the days. Time became measured in different units. The gap between meals, the hours until the next warm place opened, the minutes you could spend in a store before the security guard asked you to leave. My reflection in storefront windows became that of a stranger, hollow cheeks, distant eyes, clothes that hung loose on a shrinking frame. But the worst part was the dreams. Every night, I dreamed of my old life. I dreamed of Emma's laugh, of Sarah's smile, of boardroom meetings where people respected my opinion. I dreamed of hot showers and clean sheets and refrigerators full of food. And every morning, I woke up to the harsh reality that those dreams belonged to someone else now. Someone I used to be, but could never be again. As December approached, bringing with it the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and never leaves, I began to understand why some people just gave up, why they stopped fighting, stopped hoping, stopped believing that tomorrow could be different from today. The distance between Michael Thompson, the CEO, and Michael Thompson, the homeless man, seemed infinite, unbridgeable. That's when I learned the cruelest lesson of all. Rock bottom has a basement. The morning it happened was one of those Michigan winter days that cuts through your clothes like they're made of paper. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and turns your breath into white clouds that disappear as quickly as hope. I'd been awake since 4 when the street cleaner's rumbling had shaken me from the restless half-sleep that passes for rest when you're living on a bench. Roosevelt Park was covered in a thin layer of frost that made everything look clean and beautiful from a distance, but up close revealed the garbage and decay that accumulated in forgotten corners. I pulled the torn blanket, a gift from a church group that had stopped coming around, tighter around my shoulders and tried to make myself smaller, hoping to conserve what little body heat I had left. The fountain had been turned off for winter, leaving only a concrete bowl filled with dead leaves and ice. I'd filled my water bottle there so many times during warmer days, back when I still believed this was temporary, back when I still thought someone would clear my name and restore my life. Now it stood as a monument to frozen possibilities. My stomach hadn't stopped growling in 3 days. The shelter had been full the night before. Too many people, too few beds, and I'd arrived too late to get a meal. The McDonald's where I sometimes spent afternoons had banned me after the manager complained I was disturbing customers. Apparently, homelessness was bad for business, even when you bought something and sat quietly in the corner. I was contemplating the mathematics of survival, how long I could make the 17 cents in my pocket last, whether I had the energy to walk to the downtown mission, whether it was worth begging for food and risking another humiliation when I heard them coming. Laughter, loud, carefree, entitled laughter that echoed off the buildings surrounding the park. The kind of laughter I remembered from my youth, when the world was full of possibilities and other people's pains seemed distant and abstract. I looked up to see 4 young men, probably college age, walking toward my bench with the confident swagger of people who'd never questioned whether they'd eat that day. They were everything I used to be: clean clothes, expensive sneakers, phones in their hands, futures stretching ahead of them like wide, smooth highways. The leader of the group, a tall kid with perfectly styled hair and a Michigan State jacket, spotted me first and nudged his friends. "Look at this guy," he said. Loud enough for me to hear, but pretending I couldn't. Living the dream right here in Roosevelt Park. His friends giggled. One of them, a stocky kid with a baseball cap, pulled out his phone and started recording. "Dude, this is perfect. Real Detroit authenticity." I tried to make myself smaller, to disappear into the bench, but there was nowhere to go. The park was small, surrounded by busy streets, and these kids stood between me and the only exit. I'd learned that the best strategy in situations like this was to become invisible, to avoid eye contact, to wait for them to get bored and move on. But they didn't move on. "Hey, buddy," the leader called out, walking closer. "You awake over there? We've got some questions for our social media." I kept my head down, staring at the cracks in the concrete at my feet. Each crack told a story of freeze and thaw, of pressure and time, of small damages that accumulated until something broke completely. I understood those cracks. "I think he's ignoring us," said another one, a thin kid with expensive glasses who looked like he'd never missed a meal in his life. "That's rude, don't you think?" The kid with the baseball cap was still filming. "This is going to be hilarious. Day in the life of a Detroit bum. It'll get like 1 million views." That's when the leader kicked my bag. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a real kick, hard enough to send my duffel bag skidding across the concrete, spilling its contents onto the frozen ground. My extra shirt, threadbare and stained, but the only clean thing I owned. The remains of a sandwich I'd been saving for later. A photograph of Emma from her 10th birthday, creased and faded from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. "Oops," he said, grinning. "The Butterfingers." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, cutting through the morning air like broken glass. I felt something die inside me, some small flame of dignity that had somehow survived everything else. This wasn't about money or even food. This was about sport. I was their entertainment. "Pick it up," the leader said, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who'd never been told no. "Clean up your mess." I looked up at him for the first time and saw my own reflection in his eyes, dirty, desperate, defeated. He saw me as less than human, as something to be poked and prodded for amusement. The phone camera was still rolling, capturing my humiliation for posterity. I said, "Pick it up, bum!" The words hit me like physical blows. Bum, loser, trash. Each label he threw at me landed with the weight of truth, because that's what I'd become. That's how the world saw me now. That's how I was starting to see myself. I got down on my knees and started gathering my things. The photo of Emma was wet from the melted frost, her smile blurring as the ink ran. My hands shook from cold, from hunger, from rage, from shame. The kids laughed harder as I crawled around the concrete, collecting the debris of my life. "This is gold," the one with the camera said. "Pure gold." "Look at him go. Maybe we should make him dance next," suggested the thin one. "I've got a $5 bill. Think he'd dance for it?" "Probably do anything for $5, the leader said. "These people have no pride." No pride. The words echoed in my head as I clutched my belongings to my chest. He was right. Whatever pride I'd once had, the pride that had built a company, that had provided for a family, that had made me believe I mattered in the world, was gone. Stripped away layer by layer until nothing remained but this, a broken man groveling on concrete while children laughed. "Please," I whispered, the word barely audible. "Please just leave me alone." "What was that?" The leader cupped his ear theatrically. "Speak up, we can't hear you." "He said please," the thin one said. "How polite. Mom always said homeless people were just misunderstood." More laughter. The camera kept rolling. I closed my eyes and wished I could disappear completely, wished I could sink into the concrete and become another crack in the foundation of a city that had forgotten me. That's when the stocky kid with the baseball cap stepped closer and did something that broke me completely. He spat, not near me, not around me, but directly on me. The saliva landed on my cheek. Warm and humiliating, and I felt the last piece of my humanity shatter. "That's what you are," he said, his voice full of disgust. "Spit on the sidewalk of life." They walked away after that, their laughter fading as they moved toward the street, probably heading to classes or jobs or warm apartments where people loved them. The kid with the phone was already uploading the video, adding hashtags, turning my degradation into content. I sat there for a long time after they left, my bag clutched against my chest, their spit still wet on my face. The morning sun climbed higher, but it brought no warmth. Office workers began their commute through the park, stepping around me like I was an obstacle, their eyes fixed on their phones or the distance, anywhere but on the broken man on the bench. I tried to remember who I used to be. Michael Thompson, CEO. Michael Thompson, husband and father. Michael Thompson, who once commanded respect and admiration, but that man felt like a character from a movie I'd seen long ago, unreal and unreachable. The photo of Emma was ruined, the ink having run together until her face was an unrecognizable blur. I held it up to the light, trying to see some trace of my daughter in the damaged image, but she was gone, just like everything else. That's when I understood the true cruelty of homelessness. It wasn't just about lacking shelter or food. It was about becoming invisible to humanity while simultaneously being visible to its worst impulses. I was ignored by those who might help and noticed by those who wanted to hurt. I existed in a liminal space between visibility and invisibility, seen only when someone wanted a target for their cruelty. The tears came then, hot and bitter and useless. They wouldn't change anything. They wouldn't bring back my dignity or my daughter or my life. They were just salt water rolling down dirty cheeks, absorbed by the concrete that had become my world. As the morning wore on and the park filled with people living real lives, going to real jobs, loving real families, I made a decision, not a conscious choice, really, but a surrender. I would stop fighting. I would stop hoping. I would stop pretending that Michael Thompson the man was anything more than Michael Thompson the bum. The kids had been right about one thing. I had no pride left. And without pride, without dignity, without hope, what was left? Just a collection of bones and flesh and memories, taking up space on a bench in a forgotten corner of a city that had moved on without me. I pulled the blanket over my head and tried to disappear. The hours after the humiliation blurred together like watercolors in rain. I sat on that bench, wrapped in my torn blanket, feeling the weight of their words settling into my bones like the cold that had become my constant companion. The spit had dried on my cheek, but I couldn't bring myself to wipe it away. It felt like evidence of what I'd become, a scarlet letter written in saliva and shame. People continued to pass through Roosevelt Park as the day wore on. A businessman in a wool coat, talking rapidly on his phone about quarterly reports, a young mother pushing a stroller, singing softly to her baby, two teenagers holding hands, laughing about something only they understood. Each of them moved through a world I no longer belonged to, a world where people mattered, where lives had purpose, where tomorrow held possibility. I watched them with the detached fascination of someone observing a nature documentary. These creatures seemed so different from me, so vibrant and alive, as if they breathed a different kind of air. They had destinations, they had people waiting for them, they had reasons to hurry, reasons to smile, reasons to believe the next day would be better than the last. The temperature dropped as afternoon became evening. My stomach had stopped growling and settled into a hollow ache that seemed to pull my entire body inward. I hadn't eaten anything solid in 2 days, and the water from the park fountain had been my only sustenance. Even that was becoming dangerous as the pipes began to freeze, leaving only trickles of ice-cold water that hurt to swallow. As darkness settled over Detroit, the park emptied of everyone except me and the occasional police patrol that would shine a flashlight in my direction, assess whether I was a threat, and move on. I'd learned the rules of this invisible world. Don't cause trouble, don't make noise, don't remind the visible world that you exist. But tonight was different. Tonight, something inside me was breaking in a way that went deeper than hunger or cold or humiliation. It was as if the very core of who I was, had been, was dissolving. The businessman, the husband, the father, even the homeless man with a story and a name. All of it was fading until only pain remained. I pulled out the ruined photograph of Emma. Though I could barely make out her features in the dim streetlight, she would be 12 now, probably asleep in her warm bed in the house that used to be mine, dreaming of school projects and friends and a future that stretched ahead of her like an endless summer. Did she think about me at all? Did Sarah tell her where I was, or had they simply edited me out of their story like an uncomfortable chapter? The thought of Emma growing up without knowing what had happened to her father, of her eventually forgetting my voice, my laugh, the way I used to read her bedtime stories, it carved out pieces of my heart that I didn't know could be carved out. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe she was safer believing her father was simply gone rather than knowing he had fallen so completely. A winter wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of snow and exhaust and something else, the scent of food from a restaurant somewhere nearby. It made my empty stomach contract with longing, but also with something deeper. The memory of cooking Sunday breakfast for my family. The sound of bacon sizzling in the pan, Emma's sleepy voice asking if the pancakes were ready yet. Those memories felt like weapons now, each one cutting deeper than the last. I tried to push them away, to focus on the immediate concerns of survival, but they kept coming. Emma's first steps, her first word, which was Dada, the way she used to fall asleep on my chest while we watched cartoons on Saturday mornings. That's when I realized the cruelest truth of all. I wasn't just dying from hunger or cold or neglect, I was dying from the absence of love. When you're homeless, people don't just refuse to give you money or food, they refuse to see you as human. They refuse to acknowledge that you have a name, a history, people who once loved you. You become a problem to be solved or avoided, not a person to be known. The loneliness was overwhelming. More than the physical discomfort, more than the constant fear, it was the absolute isolation that was killing me. To be surrounded by millions of people, but known by none. To have loved and been loved, but to have no one who would mourn your disappearance. to matter so little that you could vanish tomorrow and the world would continue spinning without missing a beat. I looked up at the sky, where stars struggled to shine through the city's glow and the gathering clouds. Somewhere beyond those stars, religious people claimed, was a God who loved everyone, who knew every sparrow that fell, who counted the hairs on every head. I had believed that once, back when belief was easy, back when I had a comfortable pew in a suburban church and tithed 10% of my considerable income. But where was that God now? Where was he when David had betrayed me, when the federal agents had seized my assets, when Sarah had walked away, when those kids had spit on me like I was garbage? If God loved everyone, if he had a plan, if he cared about the least of these, then why was I here, slowly dying on a park bench while the world looked the other way? The questions bubbled up from a place I'd been trying to ignore, a place where faith and doubt wrestled like Jacob and the angel. I'd been angry at God before, when my father died too young, when business deals fell through, when life didn't match my expectations. But this was different. This was rage born of abandonment, of promises that seemed hollow in the face of absolute desolation. God, I whispered, my voice cracking from disuse and desperation. The word felt foreign on my lips, like a language I'd once spoken fluently but had forgotten. God, if you're real, if you're there, where are you? The wind was my only answer, cutting through my clothes like a blade. I used to believe in you, I said, louder now, not caring if anyone heard me talking to the empty air. I used to think you had a plan. I used to think you cared about people like me, but people like me, we don't exist to you, do we? We're just casualties in someone else's story. A police car drove slowly through the park, its headlights sweeping across me like a searchlight. I ducked my head, instinctively trying to avoid attention, but the car continued on. Even the police didn't see me as worth stopping for anymore. I had everything, I continued, my voice growing stronger with anger. I had a family, a business, a future. I helped people. I gave to charity. I tried to be a good man. And this is what I get. This is your plan. The tears came again, but they felt different this time. Not tears of self-pity or shame, but tears of rage and betrayal. I was crying for every prayer that had gone unanswered, every moment of faith that had been met with silence, every time I'd told myself that God was testing me when he was really just absent. I don't have anything left, I said, my voice breaking. No family, no home, no dignity, no hope, nothing. If you exist, if you care, then show me, because right now it feels like I'm talking to an empty sky. The park fell into complete silence, except for the distant hum of traffic on the streets that bordered my small world. No angels appeared. No voice spoke from the clouds. No mysterious stranger arrived with food or shelter or even a kind word. Just silence, vast and echoing and final. I laughed then, a bitter sound that hurt my throat. Of course you're not there. Or if you are, you don't care about broken people. You care about people who have something to offer, something to tithe, something to contribute to your glory. People like me, we're just debris. The photograph of Emma slipped from my numb fingers and fluttered to the ground. I watched it land, face down on the concrete, and something inside me snapped completely. I was losing her too, letting her memory slip away like everything else. Soon I wouldn't even have the pain of missing her because I wouldn't remember what it felt like to be loved. I'm done, I said to the uncaring sky. I'm done fighting, done hoping, done believing in fairy tales about a God who loves the broken. This is it, this is all there is. Cold concrete and empty stomachs and children who spit on you for sport. I lay down on the bench, pulling the blanket over my head like a shroud. The metal was ice cold against my cheek. But I welcomed it. Cold was honest. Cold didn't make promises it couldn't keep. Cold didn't pretend to love you while letting you die alone. If this is how it ends, I whispered into the darkness of the blanket, then let it end. I can't carry this anymore. I can't be Michael Thompson anymore. I can't be anyone anymore. The words hung in the air like my breath, visible for a moment before disappearing into nothing. Just like me. Just like everything I'd ever been or hoped to be. I closed my eyes and waited for tomorrow, though I couldn't imagine why it would be any different from today. Why it would be anything but more of the same endless diminishment, more proof that some lives simply didn't matter, more evidence that the universe was vast and cold and indifferent to the suffering of forgotten men on forgotten benches in forgotten corners of the world. In that moment, I truly believed it was over. Not just my life, but any possibility that life had meaning, that love was real, that hope was anything more than a cruel joke played on people too naive to see the truth. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sensation of someone watching me. Not the hostile attention I'd grown accustomed to, the stares of people who saw me as a problem or a spectacle, but something different, something patient and gentle, like sunlight warming your face on a cool morning. My eyes were still closed beneath the blanket, but I could feel a presence nearby. Not threatening, not intrusive, just there, waiting. It reminded me of how Emma used to stand beside my bed on Christmas morning when she was little, barely containing her excitement, but trying not to wake me too abruptly. The thought of Emma sent a fresh wave of pain through my chest, and I almost retreated back into sleep. But the presence remained, steady and warm, unlike anything I'd felt in months. Slowly, reluctantly, I pulled the blanket away from my face. The park was bathed in that strange, ethereal light that sometimes appears in the hour before dawn. Not quite night, not quite day, when the world exists in possibility. The streetlights had dimmed, but the sun hadn't yet appeared, leaving everything soft and indistinct, like a photograph slightly out of focus. And there, sitting on the bench across from mine, was a man. He wasn't remarkable at first glance. Medium height, dark hair, wearing simple clothes that looked like they'd seen somewhere, but were clean and well-maintained. He could have been a construction worker getting ready for an early shift, or maybe someone heading to the airport for a dawn flight. But there was something about the way he sat, perfectly still and completely relaxed, that made him seem like he'd been there forever. Our eyes met, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in so long I'd forgotten what to call it. Recognition. Not the surface recognition of having seen someone before, but the deep recognition of being truly seen. He looked at me, not through me, not around me, not with the quick aversion most people practiced, but directly at me, with eyes that seemed to hold infinite patience. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the still air. I sat up, suddenly self-conscious about my appearance, my smell, the fact that I was everything he probably worked hard to avoid. "Every night's rough," I said, my voice hoarse from sleep and disuse. He nodded, as if he understood completely. "Mind if I sit here for a while? I'm waiting for someone." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Someone asking permission to sit in a public park, as if I owned the bench, as if my comfort mattered. "It's a free country," I said. He moved to my bench, sitting on the far end, close enough to talk, but far enough away to respect my space. The distance felt deliberate, thoughtful, like someone who understood boundaries and the delicate protocols of human interaction. "What's your name?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked my name? Really asked, as if the answer mattered. "Michael," I said after a moment. "Michael Thompson." "Nice to meet you." "Michael Thompson, I'm Jesus." The name hung in the air between us, strange and familiar at the same time. Jesus was a common enough name. I'd known several men named Jesus over the years, mostly landscapers and restaurant workers, but something about the way he said it, with quiet certainty rather than introduction, made my skin prickle with an odd recognition. "Jesus," I repeated. That's, that's an interesting name. He smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. It wasn't the polite smile of social obligation or the pitying smile I'd grown to hate. It was the smile of someone genuinely happy to be exactly where he was, talking to exactly the person he was talking to. My mother always said it was a big name to live up to, he said, but she was like that, always expecting the best from people. There was something about his voice, his manner, that made me want to keep talking. Maybe it was the loneliness, or maybe it was the simple fact that he wasn't looking at me like I was dangerous or disgusting. He was talking to me like I was a person worth talking to. "You don't look like you belong here," I said. "In this park, I mean, at this hour. Where do I look like I belong?" The question made me really study him for the first time. His clothes were simple, but clean. Worn jeans, a navy blue sweater, work boots that had clearly been used but weren't falling apart. His hands looked like they'd done real work, but his face had a serenity that seemed untouched by the kind of grinding stress that aged most working men. He could have been 30 or 50. It was impossible to tell. "I don't know," I admitted. "Somewhere better than this. This seems like exactly where I need to be," he said, looking around the park as if seeing it for the first time. "It's peaceful here. Good place to think." "Peaceful," I repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. I guess that's one way to look at it. "You don't find it peaceful." I gestured to my situation, the blanket, the torn duffel bag, the bench that had become my bed. "Does this look peaceful to you?" "You look tired," he said, not answering my question directly. "More than tired. You look like you're carrying something heavy." The observation was so accurate, so gentle, that I felt tears threatening again. I turned away, embarrassed by my own vulnerability. Everyone's carrying something. True, but not everyone's carrying it alone. The words hit me like a physical blow. Alone. Yes, that was exactly what I was. Completely, utterly alone, in a way I'd never imagined possible. I'd thought I understood loneliness during my marriage, when Sarah and I went through rough patches, or during business trips when I missed Emma. But this was different. This was isolation so complete it felt like drowning in silence. "Some people choose to be alone," I said, trying to maintain some dignity. "Do they, or do they just run out of people willing to stay?" I looked at him sharply, wondering if he was mocking me, but his expression remained completely open, genuinely curious rather than judgmental. "What would you know about it?" The words came out harsher than I intended, edged with all the anger and frustration I'd been carrying. "You clearly have your life together. You clearly have somewhere to go, people who care about you. What makes you think that? Look at you. Clean clothes, clear eyes, sitting here talking to a homeless man like it's the most natural thing in the world. People like you don't end up like me. People like me, people who matter, people the world hasn't forgotten." He was quiet for a long moment, watching a pigeon pick at crumbs near the fountain. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. "I've been forgotten plenty of times, Michael. I've been rejected by people I loved, abandoned by friends when things got difficult, written off by society as dangerous or irrelevant. I've been hungry and homeless and completely alone. I know what it feels like to wonder if anyone would notice if you just disappeared." Something in his tone made me believe him completely. This wasn't someone offering empty platitudes or trying to relate from a position of comfort. This was someone who had actually been where I was, who understood the specific weight of abandonment. "How did you—" I started, then stopped. "How do you ask someone how they survived complete despair without admitting that you're not sure you can? How did I get through it?" I nodded. I remembered who I was underneath all the things that had been taken away. What if there's nothing underneath? The question escaped before I could stop it, raw and honest, and more vulnerable than anything I'd said to another human being in months. He turned to face me fully. And for a moment I felt like he could see everything, not just the homeless man on the bench, but Michael the CEO, Michael the husband, Michael the father, Michael the child who had once believed in God and goodness and the possibility that life had meaning. There's always something underneath, Michael, always. The question is whether you're willing to dig deep enough to find it. I've lost everything, I said, the words barely a whisper. My business, my family, my home, my dignity. What's left to find? Your name? My name? You're Michael Thompson. Not Michael Thompson who used to be a CEO. Not Michael Thompson who lost everything. Just Michael Thompson. That name belongs to you no matter what happens to anything else. The simplicity of it was staggering. For months I'd been defining myself by what I'd lost, by what I'd failed to be, by how far I'd fallen. But underneath all of that, I was still just Michael Thompson. The boy who had dreamed of building something meaningful, the young man who had fallen in love with Sarah, the father who had read bedtime stories to his daughter. Sometimes, he continued, we have to lose everything else to remember who we really are. I wanted to argue with him, to point out that identity meant nothing when you were dying slowly on a park bench. But something about his presence made argument feel unnecessary. He wasn't trying to convince me of anything, wasn't offering easy answers or false hope. He was simply sitting with me in the darkness, acknowledging the weight of what I was carrying. Are you religious? I asked, though I wasn't sure why. He smiled again, that same transformative expression. I'm spiritual. I believe in love, in redemption, in the possibility that every person matters infinitely. No matter how far they've fallen or how forgotten they feel. Even people like me, especially people like you. The especially hung in the air between us. And I felt something shifting inside my chest. Not hope exactly, but something like the memory of hope. For the first time in months, I wasn't alone with my despair. Someone was sitting with me in it, not trying to fix it or explain it away, just acknowledging that it was real, and that I was real, and that somehow, impossibly, that might be enough. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn touching the edges of the horizon. Soon the park would fill with joggers and dog walkers, and people heading to jobs that gave their lives structure and meaning. But for now, in this suspended moment between night and day, I sat with a stranger named Jesus who somehow made me remember that I had a name too. The conversation with Jesus lasted until full daylight broke over Detroit, though I couldn't tell you exactly what we talked about for all those hours. Not because I forgot, but because the words seemed less important than the presence. The simple fact of being heard without judgment, seen without disgust, acknowledged without conditions. He didn't offer me money. He didn't invite me to his home or his church, or promise to solve my problems. He didn't lecture me about faith or quote scripture, or try to convince me that everything happened for a reason. He just sat with me while the city woke up around us, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped me remember pieces of myself I'd thought were lost forever. What did you love most about being a father? He asked at one point. The question surprised me. Most people, when they bothered to ask about my past at all, wanted to know about the business. The scandal, the dramatic fall from grace. Nobody ever asked about Emma. The ordinary moments, I said, after thinking for a while. Not the big events, birthdays, holidays, school plays. Those were wonderful, but they weren't daily. It was the small things, making her breakfast on school mornings, helping with homework at the kitchen table, the way she'd curl up next to me when we watched movies. Even when she was too old for that kind of thing, you were a good father. It wasn't a question, it was stated as simple fact, with the kind of certainty that made me believe it might be true. I failed her in the end, I said. I failed everyone. Did you, or did circumstances beyond your control make it impossible for you to be the father you wanted to be? I'd never thought about it that way before. The guilt had been so complete, so overwhelming. that I'd never separated my choices from the forces that had acted upon me. David's betrayal wasn't my fault. The media's rush to judgment wasn't my fault. Even Sarah's decision to leave, while it had devastated me, wasn't necessarily a moral failing on my part. She needed stability, I said, defending Sarah even as I defended myself. Emma needed a home, security, normalcy. I couldn't give her those things anymore. Because you chose not to. Or because you lost the ability to provide them. Because I lost everything. But did you lose the part of you that loved her? The question hit me like a physical blow. No, I hadn't lost that. If anything, the love had grown more intense, more desperate, more painful. Even now, sitting on this bench in my torn clothes with my ruined reputation, I loved Emma exactly as much as I had when I was tucking her into bed in our suburban home. "Ooh, the love doesn't go away," Jesus said, as if reading my thoughts. "That's the thing about real love. It's not dependent on circumstances. It exists independent of success or failure, wealth or poverty, presence or absence." We talked about my business too, but again he approached it from angles I'd never considered. Instead of asking about the financial details or the legal complications, he wanted to know why I'd started the company in the first place. "And I wanted to build something," I said, "something that would last, something that would matter. I wanted to create jobs, to help other people succeed, to be part of making the world a little better." "And did you do that?" "For a while, before it all fell apart." "Did the good you did disappear when the company failed?" I thought about the employees I'd hired, the careers I'd helped launch, the clients whose businesses had grown because of the solutions we'd provided. None of that had been erased by David's crimes or the federal investigation. "No," I said slowly. "I guess it didn't. Then it wasn't all for nothing." As the morning progressed, something remarkable happened. The park began to fill with its usual inhabitants. Joggers, dog walkers, office workers cutting through on their way to the downtown core, but instead of making me feel more invisible, their presence seemed to confirm my existence. I was part of this place, this community of strangers. I belonged here as much as anyone else. A woman jogged past with her golden retriever, and instead of avoiding eye contact, I found myself nodding good morning. She nodded back, a simple acknowledgement that we were both human beings sharing the same space, breathing the same air, worthy of basic courtesy. An elderly man walked slowly past, using a cane, and when he stumbled slightly on an uneven piece of sidewalk, I stood up instinctively, ready to help. He caught himself and waved to show he was okay. But the exchange felt significant. I was still capable of caring about others, still willing to offer help even when I needed it desperately myself. "It's time for me to go," Jesus said eventually. As the morning rush reached its peak and the park began to empty out, the words filled me with panic. "Wait," I said, reaching out without thinking. This conversation, I don't want it to end." "It doesn't have to end, Michael. You can carry it with you. But I don't know how to do this alone. I don't know how to be Michael Thompson when Michael Thompson doesn't seem to exist anymore." He stood up. And for a moment, the morning light behind him made it difficult to see his face clearly. "You're not alone," he said. "You never were, even when it felt like you were. The love that made you a good father, the vision that built your company, the capacity for compassion that makes you worry about strangers. All of that is still inside you. But what do I do with it? How do I live with these things when I have nowhere to live? No way to provide for myself? No path back to the life I used to have?" "You live one day at a time, one moment at a time. You remember that your worth isn't determined by your circumstances, and you look for ways to love others even when you feel unlovable yourself." He started to walk away, but then turned back. "There's a shelter 3 blocks north of here on Cass Avenue. They serve breakfast until 10, and they have job placement services." More importantly, they have people there who understand what you're going through. I've tried shelters, I said. They're difficult. Try this one. Ask for Maria. Tell her Jesus sent you. The way he said it, not a guy named Jesus or someone called Jesus, but simply Jesus, as if the name carried weight and meaning, made me look at him more carefully. But the morning sun was fully up now, creating shadows and reflections that made it hard to focus on details. Will I see you again? I asked. You'll see me everywhere, Michael. In every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, every time someone chooses love over indifference. You'll see me in yourself when you remember who you really are. He walked away then, disappearing into the crowd of morning commuters as if he'd never been there at all. But the bench still held the impression of where he'd sat, still carried the faint warmth of his presence. I gathered my things slowly, carefully folding the damaged photograph of Emma and placing it in the safest pocket of my duffel bag. The image was still ruined, still blurred beyond recognition, but somehow it felt precious again rather than painful. The walk to Cass Avenue took me through parts of Detroit I'd never seen, even during my months on the street. The morning was crisp and clear, and I found myself noticing things I'd been blind to before: the way sunlight caught the windows of old buildings, the determined green of weeds growing through sidewalk cracks, the careful way an elderly woman helped her husband navigate the uneven pavement. The shelter was a converted church, its old stone facade speaking of permanence and sanctuary. Inside, the smell of coffee and bacon mixed with industrial disinfectant and something else, something that might have been hope. I'm looking for Maria, I told the young man at the reception desk. Jesus sent me. His face lit up immediately. Oh, you know Jesus. He's amazing, isn't he? Let me get Maria for you. Maria turned out to be a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands, the kind of person who'd clearly spent her life taking care of others. She looked at me without judgment, without pity, with the same sort of direct, warm attention that Jesus had given me. Jesus said you might be coming by, she said. He said you were someone special, someone who'd been through a hard time but was ready to start rebuilding. He said that, among other things. Come on, let's get you some breakfast and then we'll talk about what comes next. The breakfast was simple: scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, coffee, but it was the first real meal I'd had in days. As I ate, Maria told me about their programs: job training, housing assistance, counseling services, even help with legal issues. But more than that, she talked about community, about the family of people who'd found their way to this place and chose to help each other rebuild their lives. The hardest part, she said, is usually believing that you deserve help, that you're worth investing in. But Jesus sees something in you, and that man has never been wrong about people. How long have you known him? She paused, considering the question. That's interesting. It feels like I've known him forever. But I'm not sure I could tell you exactly when we first met. He just appears when people need him most, shows up at exactly the right moment with exactly the right words. After breakfast, she introduced me to other residents, men and women who'd lost everything for various reasons, but were slowly, carefully building new lives. They welcomed me without question, sharing their stories and their strategies for survival, their failures and their small victories. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in months. It was narrow and institutional, in a room I shared with 3 other men, but it was warm and safe and dignified. As I lay there listening to the sounds of people sleeping peacefully around me, I thought about the conversation with Jesus, about the things he'd helped me remember about myself. I was Michael Thompson. I was a father who'd loved his daughter completely, a businessman who'd tried to do right by his employees, a man who'd fallen as far as it was possible to fall and somehow survived. I was still here. I was still capable of love, still capable of hope, still capable of becoming whoever I chose to be next. The path back wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks and disappointments, legal battles and emotional struggles. Sarah might never forgive me, and Emma might grow up with only distant memories of her father. But those possibilities no longer felt like endpoints. They felt like challenges to work through, problems to solve, obstacles to overcome. 3 weeks later, Maria helped me get a job at a local nonprofit, doing data entry and basic administrative work. The pay was modest, but it was honest work that contributed to something meaningful. 6 months after that, I'd saved enough money for a studio apartment in a neighborhood that was rough around the edges but full of people trying to rebuild their lives. I never saw Jesus again, not in the way I saw him that morning in Roosevelt Park. But Maria was right. I saw him everywhere. In the patience of the social worker who helped me apply for government assistance, in the kindness of my new landlord who was willing to rent to someone with no credit and a complicated history, in the small acts of generosity from my co-workers who included me in their lunch conversations and their weekend plans. Most surprisingly, I saw him in myself, in the decision to volunteer at the shelter on weekends, helping new arrivals navigate the system that had once seemed so impersonal and hopeless, in the choice to share my story with other men who'd lost everything, helping them remember that they were more than their circumstances, in the courage to write letters to Emma, even though Sarah never responded, because the love I felt for my daughter was real, regardless of whether it could be expressed. A year later, I was walking through Roosevelt Park on my way to work when I stopped at the bench where everything had changed. It looked exactly the same, metal and concrete, functional and unremarkable, but it felt different now, charged with memory and possibility. "Thank you," I said quietly, not sure if I was talking to the bench, the park, the memory of Jesus, or something larger and more mysterious than any of them. A jogger ran past and nodded good morning. A mother pushed her toddler on the swing set. An elderly man fed pigeons near the fountain. Life continued, ordinary and extraordinary, full of people carrying invisible burdens and invisible hopes. I walked on toward my office, toward my purposeful day, toward the life I was building one choice at a time. Behind me, the bench sat empty, waiting for the next person who needed to remember their name, waiting for the next conversation that might change everything. The morning sun climbed higher over Detroit, and somewhere in the city, I was certain Jesus was sitting with someone else who'd forgotten they mattered, helping them remember who they really were. Dear listeners, we hope Michael Thompson's story touched your heart. If you'd like to keep experiencing powerful stories like this, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Every day we share stories that reveal the depth of life and the human heart. We'll be waiting for you in the comments.